What's up YouTube? This is Matt and today I have a very special video for you guys. This is the second installment in my build specific series and it's featuring Danny from Nerd on a Budget and he's going to be showing off his sub $200 gaming PC. So Danny, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hey, what's up Tech by Matt fans? My name is Danny and I have a YouTube channel called Nerd on a Budget. It's a tech and general advice channel that I aim towards nerdy and geeky people like myself with an emphasis on saving money.
So can you quickly go over the specs of your sub $200 gaming PC and what was the final price of it?
So the key specs of the build are definitely within the CPU and the GPU, as these are the components that drive gaming performance the most. And for the CPU, I'm running with the AMD Phenom 2 X4 955 Black Edition quad-core processor. And for the GPU, I'm running with the NVIDIA EVGA brand GTX 660. The CPU is paired with an MSI NF750 motherboard, and I'm running 4GB of low-profile Kingston DDR3 RAM, clocked at 1333 MHz. For storage, I went with an older, lower-capacity drive because it was a lot more inexpensive, and it's a 160GB SATA 2 Samsung SpinPoint hard drive. The whole system is powered by a Cooler Master Extreme Power Plus 500 watt power supply, and the case that they all went in was the Enermax Thorax mid-size tower.
So my first question for you is why did you go for an older quad-core processor over something like a newer dual-core processor?
So I decided to go with an older AMD quad-core processor. This one's actually from 2008 because it's still really relevant right now, even in 2016. The only thing is that it's a little bit more power hungry and it outputs a little bit more heat, but that's not really a big problem because power supplies kind of come standard at around 500 watts these days anyways, so that takes care of the power issue. And as for the heat, if you're running it at stock, it shouldn't be a problem, and if you do plan to overclock, you can always throw a beefy heatsink on there to take care of that. But I didn't go with a dual-core Intel processor because the price-to-performance ratio is just not there. Intel processors tend to keep their value even after a few years, so you're not going to be paying too much less than how much it costs at the original price new. And the AMD dual-core processors just aren't that powerful. A lot of them are integrated APU chips, and you're going to be paying for an integrated graphics chipset in the processor, but you're not going to be using it because you're most likely going to be using a dedicated graphics card. So even used APUs, their price-performance ratio isn't there either.
So is the stock fan really as noisy as everyone says it is?
So this is what it would sound like if we were in the same room with each other and had a conversation. So this is pretty typical audio levels. And this is what it sounds like when I have the CPU loaded with a game. So the fan's on pretty loud, trying to keep the CPU cool. And as you can tell, it is pretty loud.
So in a few of my budget builds, I've also used 4GB of RAM, and it seems to work fine. Do you think 4GB of RAM is enough for most games if someone's on a extremely tight budget?
So I think up to this point, 4GB has been a really good number to shoot for really low-end, tight budget builds. You know, you've done it in your builds, and I've done it in this build. But I think for moving forward into the near future, people should aim for at least 6GB and ideally 8GB. So when I was benchmarking Overwatch, the RAM was fully utilized, and I'm pretty sure that was what was causing some of the FPS drops in terms of bottlenecking the system. And when I tried to run GTA 5 on it, I was actually getting horrible frame rates due to the RAM. It wasn't due to the GPU or the CPU. I've run GTA 5 on systems that had 8GB and 16GB before, and it usually utilizes around 6 to 7GB. The price difference between 4GB and 8GB is usually, anywhere from $10 to $15, whether it's new or used. So just paying a little bit extra more definitely gets you a ton of benefits when it comes to system performance.
So in this build, you used a used power supply and a used hard drive. Now, these are two parts I normally wouldn't recommend my subscribers buy used just because power supplies, if they fail, it could take out the entire system, and hard drives because if your hard drive fails, losing data sucks. Now, with that being said, would you generally recommend that the average person buy these parts used, and why?
So you're definitely right. These two components are a hugely debated topic in terms of, if it's okay to use them used or not within the PC building community. And personally, I think if you do your homework, then you should be fine. So this is my take on it and why I'm comfortable using both of these parts used. In terms of the hard drive, when you buy something used, before you load it up with all your programs and files and OS and all that, you can run diagnostic software to see how many hours it's been on, how many times it's been power cycled on and off, and stuff like reallocated boot sectors, as well as the general drive health. So that's the first thing I do when I buy used hard drives. And my thought process on it is that hard drives are meant to last in the hundreds of thousands of hours. You're most likely not going to hit that if you're an average consumer before you replace it, because SSDs are going to replace it, or higher capacity drives are coming down in price. So you're not going to ever have a hard drive and run it to the end of the mean life cycle. But the previous owner who's owned it, let's say they had it for 50,000 hours, on hours, it goes to show that that hard drive, that specific one, has stood the test of time. It's past, the first few thousand hours where hard drives might fail if they are a lemon. Like the ones with the higher amount of hours that are still going and can run through the diagnostics and show good, those ones are more likely to go even longer. And in terms of the power supply, it's true that a bad unit, when it dies, could actually take the entire system with it. But if you actually try to go out onto the internet and find specific cases where that's happened, you're going to find that the amount of dead power supplies to the amount of dead power supplies that actually took whole systems with it is actually slim to none. So I think if you just stick with known brands that have a backing, like they've been around for a while and they've been making power supplies for a while, you should be good, because they build in fail-safe mechanisms like over voltage and over current control that prevent that from happening. But at the end of the day, it has to come down to your comfort level. If you're not comfortable with buying a used power supply, there are plenty of options for new power supplies if you're patient enough, because usually after promo codes and rebates, you can bring like 500 watt power supplies down to like $20 or $15, and that's brand new.
Okay, cool. That GTX 660 was a very good deal. Now, as AMD and Nvidia are releasing their new cards on the Polaris and Pascal architectures, what do you think will be the best used value cards on the market?
So with the release of Polaris and Pascal, you're going to see a nice dip in the used GPU market, because people are going to try to offload their older cards to get the new ones. And people like us who are on budgets, that's perfect, because you see a nice, $10 to $15 price drop. Cards that were already a good deal, like the 750 Ti and the GTX 660, you're gonna see them go from the sub $80 range down to the sub $70 and $60 range. And the stronger cards like the 760 and the 770, they usually float around the 120, 130, 140 price range. They're probably going to be just barely over 100 now. And for AMD's side, cards like the 7950 and 7970, they have always been really strong in terms of the price to performance. And now you're going to see them dip below $100, which is really nice, because they're still really good for 1080p gaming, and they're not going to be obsolete yet, because VR gaming, which is what the new cards are kind of targeted towards, and 4K gaming, that's not what everyone is playing on. The standard is still 1080p, and if you're on a budget, you're definitely going to still stick to 1080p.
So overall, for $170, this is a really good gaming PC for the money. Do you think it would be possible to build a gaming PC using new parts for around the same price?
So I think it's actually impossible to match the performance of the $170 build if you were to try to use only new components. You're going to be looking at, dual core AMD APUs, and they're not going to be able to play modern games, or even games like League of Legends. They're going to struggle to even hit 30 frames per second. And this is considering, if you're really patient, you get the best promo code deals, you get the best rebates, you're not going to get anywhere near $170. I think to get similar performance, you would have to spend at least $300 to $350 on new components. So that's around double of what used components cost.
So now that we've talked about the PC, I'd like to just ask you a few questions in general about building PCs. And the first is, what are the sites that you go to personally to find good deals on PC hardware?
So my favorite sites to go to are definitely Reddit, Build a PC Sales, Reddit Hardware Swap, and Slick Deals. And the main reason for this is because this pulls information from all the other websites and from all the other retailers. So you don't have to individually go to the websites. And these all have voting systems so that people can vote the best deals to the top. So you don't have to do as much work when you want to look for the best deal. It'll naturally make its way to the top to your visibility.
Okay, cool. So, what are the places that you see people are overspending the most in PC builds where money could be saved or shifted to be used in other areas to get more performance?
In terms of overspending, I think people usually overspend in the categories of RAM and computer cases. So for RAM, they usually overspend on the heatsink because they want it to look nice. But the crappy looking RAM, it performs just the same. The aesthetics has nothing to do with the performance. And a lot of the times, people put too much RAM in their systems. Like 8 gigabytes is fine if you're just gaming. And a lot of times, I see people make gaming specific builds and they put anywhere from 16 to 32 gigabytes of RAM. You're just overspending on RAM at that point, and you're not going to utilize it all. And in terms of the cases, people, they like how the case looks, and they want to spend a decent amount of money on it. And I've seen people spend, anywhere from 70 to like in the mid 100s on their case. Whereas I bought budget cases for $15 after rebate and promo codes multiple times. People try to attribute it to better airflow, but even the average case has decent airflow. And even I'm guilty of spending a little bit more on my case. My own personal rig is a case that costs around $60 because I'm kind of a sucker for cube form factors. But sometimes you just gotta spend a little bit more, and there's nothing wrong with that.
So, do you think the release of AMD's Zen processors will be enough to give Intel competition and shake up the market enough? And what do you think that's going to do to the used processor market?
I'm really hoping that AMD is going to be able to compete with Intel with the release of Zen, but I've had high expectations before only to be let down because with these release events and unveiling of specs and such, manufacturers always tend to overhype their product and their capabilities. And then when they finally manufacture the chips and get them out to the users, people benchmark them and then find that they're only an incremental upgrade. AMD's been focusing on their APU line for the past couple of years, and their best chips are still, their FX series, which are 3, 4, 5 years old now. So I'm gonna hold my opinions until I see real world benchmarks. But I will say that they do have a lot of catching up to do. Otherwise, Intel is gonna continue to dominate, and they're not gonna have as good of a market share.
Okay, cool. So, finally, thanks again for coming up. And again, where can people find you if they want to see more of your content?
You can find me at my YouTube channel, Nerd on a Budget, and on Twitter at Nerd on a Budget. And thanks for having me, Matt. This was really fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. So yeah, guys, this wraps this episode up of Built Specific. This is the second episode, and I definitely plan to have more in the future. I know there was a big gap between the first and the second, and I want to give a big shout out and thanks to Danny from Nerd on a Budget for coming on. You were an awesome guest, and I'm going to be doing more collaborations with him and other YouTubers in the future, so stay tuned for that. And as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.